I am Michelle Hirsch, and it is August 12th, 2021, and we are here with Onnie Shekerijan, and she is a former Tempe City Council member and vice mayor, but there's a lot more that we can also ask you about, but we'll start with the beginning.
Yeah.
When and where were you born, and when and where were your grandparents born?
So I was born in Zanesville, Ohio, and their big claim to fame is Zane Grey lived there. But also they have a Y-shaped bridge over the Muskingum River. And so I was born there, and in 18 months after I was born, we moved to Arizona. All my relatives were born in Ohio, and in fact they homesteaded the Northwest Territories when those opened up. And lots of them, most of them settled in the Ohio River area. So Racine, Ohio, as well as an area called Ironton, Ohio. My mother's family was Ironton, some of my dad's family was Racine. But they all came down and homesteaded.
And in your family, who would you say was most influential on you or to you?
You know, I saw that question, and I would have to say it was probably my grandfathers, both of them. Both of them had a real sense of community service and the importance of not just family, but the importance of being part of influencing your community and giving back. That was really important. My father's father, my Grandpa Cross, he was at one point in time, he was the CEO and president of the Glendale Chamber of Commerce here in Arizona. And he was an engineer by trade and had worked doing time studies, which I think also comes back to part of the reason I'm totally a process gal. I love process, I love schedules, I love organizing and trying to find ways to be more efficient and effective, and I really think that came from him, although I didn't see it until I became an adult. So anyway, he was big on giving back and trying to make sure, as his family were, as we've learned about his family, they were all community leaders, state senators, mayors, it was very important that they could contribute back. And then my maternal grandfather, who I lived with when part of my growing up years, was the county auditor in Ohio County, and so I used to go with him. And you know, we'd have people stop him and ask him for help on things. And I remember being about 12 years old and being very disgusted because some man had stopped him to talk to him about his hunting dog. It was a Southern Ohio, Appalachia. This guy's hunting dog had gotten picked up by the dog catcher. And my grandfather was the county auditor. He had nothing to do with the dog pounder. And he stood there and listened to the man and nodded, and I was getting kind of irritated because this was taking time away from time I got with my grandpa. And when he was done, I said, "Grandpa, you have nothing to do with the dog catcher. Why did you listen to that guy?" And he said, "Honey, I'm a public servant, and he has a need," and he said, "and I'll make sure that his need is met, but that's my job." And he said, "It wasn't my job to say it's not my job." So he said, "I'll take care of him. We'll get his hunting dog back." And he said, that's what public service is. And I remembered that was one of the few times he ever spoke crossly to me. He was very stern about it. And he explained to me that that's what he did. You know, he was the auditor, but he was a public servant first. So those two men had a great deal of influence on my life.
Before we get to you moving to Tempe, can you share where you went to elementary school and high school and beyond?
So I went to elementary school. I started in Scottsdale at Yavapai and only went there for kindergarten, a month or so of first grade. And then we moved to Yuma, Arizona. And my grandparents and my parents had bought into a FedMart franchise. I don't know if people remember FedMart, but it was like Walmart with food. And so I remember going down there to see Yuma, and I remember the 3-hour drive back and my mother crying and saying, "You're taking me to the ends of the earth," because Yuma was pretty desolate in the 1960s. But we went down there, and they had this store, and it was very successful. It was just the right place at the right time, and my grandparents had been merchants, and they came from, my grandfather had come from a family of merchants, and so we lived there until 1970, and then I lived a year with my grandparents. My parents had some problems, and so they sent my sister and I to live with my grandparents. It was a wonderful year, by the way. I never wanted to leave. I loved living with them in this little town in Ohio where everybody was related. And then we moved back to Scottsdale, and I went 8th grade through high school in Scottsdale. I went to Kiva Elementary, and then I went to Saguaro High School, and then to ASU, and did some time, a little bit of time in the evenings for evening classes at Scottsdale Community College, and then eventually to Phoenix. Then I was engaged, and I was a pre-med major in college and wanted to go to med school, and then met my husband, and there was no med school here. And in those days, you didn't really move for the woman's career, so I applied to the nursing program at ASU and to the dental hygiene program at Phoenix College, and I got accepted to both and decided I would do the dental hygiene bit. I didn't get any career counseling, I wish I had, but did that. That's where I got I got a dental hygiene degree, and then worked in Mesa for 5 years.
And what year did you get married?
Got married in 1979, married my college sweetheart. And I remember the first time I went out with him, his name is Brian, I went out with him, I thought, whoa, this is something very different and very special. And he said he felt the same way. But we dated for 3 years. He is Mr. Spock. He is very logical. He's an engineer. We are really the yin and yang. Once we realized that we balanced each other, because I was pretty fiery as a young woman, and I could argue rings around him, and he was very patient, and so we've learned a lot from each other. We've been married 42 years now, have 3 grown children, and the 5 most adorable grandchildren, so yes.
So did you settle in Tempe after you got married?
We did. We lived in Scottsdale for 7 years, and remodeled a house on our own. My mother cried the first time she saw the house because it was in such desolate shape. She said, I couldn't believe you were going to live there. But I was 21, my husband was 25. We scraped together a down payment, and it took us about 4 years to remodel the house ourselves. But we literally gutted it. And my husband built a shop onto the house, and he replumbed the house. It was really a labor of love, and we loved that house. But in the meantime, I had gone to work. I got out of school, gone to work, and we saved all our money and had a nest egg and bought property in Tempe to build a house. So after being married about 7 years, we moved to Tempe and built the house that we currently live in. We've lived there 34 years.
And tell us a little bit about your 3 children.
Yeah. So I have a daughter, Emily, who is she is the female version of my husband. And she is an engineer, and now she is now the director of manufacturing for a biotech company in Mesa. And she does really well, and she's very smart and very logical, very logical. And then I have another daughter named Carrie, who she and her husband met in Milan, Italy, and when they were in an MBA program. And there were only 3 Americans in that program. There was my daughter, there was my future son-in-law, and his girlfriend. And my son-in-law has since said to me that he had never met a girl like my daughter, that they were just really good friends for a very long time. He and the girl broke up, and Carrie came home, and he went to Switzerland, and they maintained a long-distance romance. He came and visited us 7 times in a year, and man, I've been vetted for positions, but I have never in my life been vetted like this kid vetted me. He spent as much time with me cooking in the kitchen as he did with my husband in the shop, as he did with our daughter when she came to visit. And I joked with him about it one time. He goes, well, I wanted to know what I was getting into.
And what is his name again?
His name is Patrick.
Patrick.
And his mother was going to run for mayor of her little town in Missouri when she passed away in a car accident. So, and she was kind of the hub of their wheel. So anyway, so we have that, and they have 3. So Emily has 2 daughters, Lily and Charlotte, who are 12 and 9. And then Carrie and Patrick have 3 children, Samuel, who's 7, our Osborne, we call him Ozzy, who's 5, and then Harper, who's a little girl who's 3. And then we have what we used to jokingly call our afterthought, which was our son, Nick. He's 6 years younger than Carrie. And he has his degree in architecture and his master's and taught at the university and now works as a practicing architect.
So when you had your house, your first house, what was your inspiration or motivation to move to Tempe?
You know, we looked a lot. I had worked in Mesa as a dental hygienist, and we looked in Mesa. We wanted land. We now wish we had bought a bigger lot. We couldn't have afforded it, though. We got as big a lot as we could afford. But we looked in Mesa, we looked in the West Valley, and we really wanted someplace where community was valued and education was important. And we looked at schools. I actually called school districts and asked if I could go in and see classrooms. Kyrene let me do that. They let me come in and watch a classroom. And I liked the openness of that. And so our final decision was where to look had to do primarily with education for our kids. We only had one child at the time.
And what is the name of your neighborhood?
It's Corona del Sol Estates.
And is there a story that not many people would know about your neighborhood or that you'd like to share?
You know, I saw that question. I can't think of a story that people don't know. The thing about our neighborhood that makes it very unique, though, is that there are people from all kinds of different backgrounds, and yet there is really a sense of belonging in that neighborhood. People take care of themselves. I see that we have a neighborhood chat, and if somebody's lost a dog, people are on it out looking. We recently had some vandalism that took place on one of the houses that they had, somebody had written some nasty things regarding COVID. They had written "Love Thy Neighbor" and then had information on their garage door. They're getting ready to replace the garage door, so they painted on it information about where you could find out about vaccines, and somebody had come and defaced that, and the outpour of support for that family was really just so typical of our neighborhood. It's one of the reasons I like living there. So that makes, I think, it really unique.
Has development affected your neighborhood?
Yeah, it has, in a positive way. I mean, we often hear about how development's a bad thing. One of the things I remember my Grandpa Cross saying when I was a kid was, you know, you can't stop change. You can manage it, and you should manage it, but you can't stop change. And so we've had a lot of development and redevelopment in our strip centers around my neighborhood. And now we've got some really cool little mom and pop kind of bistros, coffee shops. And it's really nice because you run into your neighbors in those places. And so there's a real sense of community through the redevelopment that we've seen take place. And so I've been thrilled about it.
Let's talk a little bit about your career on Tempe City Council, when you ran, and about serving, and
Yeah, so when we moved to Tempe, we had 2 little girls, and our oldest was in kindergarten, and then later we had our son. And my primary focus was on our home, and I'd given up working as a hygienist, and my focus was primarily providing a really good home and being active in the schools to support the schools. And so I did that for a very long time. I served on every possible committee you can serve on in the elementary school district, and then in the high school district, and then at the state level, and even at the national level eventually. And so I'd served in a lot of those capacities as a volunteer. I fulfilled somebody's term who had left the board. And so I was on the school board in Kyrene for a year. But I never had any ambitions of serving in elected position. I liked working on campaigns a lot. Like I said earlier, I'm a process person. I really like delving in. I would do schedules and who was responsible for what and when they had to get it done. And I loved all the processing that you do if you really want to run an effective campaign. So I was kind of a process geek and enjoyed that aspect. Worked on a lot of campaigns prior to ever running. But I would advise the candidates about what I thought would work well in terms of how to campaign and what issues to campaign on. And sometimes they took my advice and other times they didn't, and that was their prerogative. I never was offended by it. But I always used to think, if I ever ran, I would do it this way. If I ever ran, I would do it that way. And so the mayor at the time, I had worked on his campaign, Hugh Hallman, and he kept bugging me to run. And I said, I've never had a desire to be an elected official. I just really enjoy the process. I enjoy the public policy aspect. I was, at that point in time, I had morphed into a second career, which was doing background research for public policy institutes, primarily on education reform. Had about a dozen clients, most of them in DC, a few of them here in the state, and was doing really well financially doing that. I could still be obsessed with my family and control what was going on at home and work part-time doing that. And he finally said to me, you could use a city council position to promote education in the city. You could use it as a bully pulpit. And that's when he got me. So my daughter was getting married, and he pulled me out of the reception and said, I just saw your daughter get married. You were using that as an excuse why you were too busy to run. I need you to really run. And I said, well, give me at least a week to get over this, and then I'll tell you. So went home, talked to the family. The kids were real excited. Yes, you should do it. You should do it. My husband was like, why do you want to do politics? I hate politicians. I hate politics. And I said, honey, it doesn't have to be your thing. I hate engineering. It doesn't have to be your thing, Just sit with me and get me through the campaign, and the rest of it will be, more like just a job. So I said, but I can't do it unless you support me, because we've always had veto power over each other. So if I didn't like something he was doing, I had veto power. And so the next morning I woke up, and on the pillow next to me was this little piece of paper that had been folded like a tent, and on it had a stick figure picture of a woman and said, vote for Onnie. So I still have it. And I went into the kitchen, I said, I take this is you're going to support me. He goes, well, I figured that if I don't support you, you're going to hate me for the rest of your life. And I said, well, I wouldn't hate you, but it would be hard for me to forget it. So he said, well, don't count on me. Can't help you. I'm busy. I'm traveling. I said, okay, no problem. Next thing I know, he's organized all my street signs. I had 100 4x4 signs on the roads. He had organized where they were going to go, and every day on his way home from work, he worked at 52nd Street in McDowell. Every day he took a different route through Tempe with tools in his car to repair, and he hated it when somebody would deface it. And I'd say, honey, it's okay. It draws attention to the sign again. And he goes, I don't like it when they put beards and mustaches on you. And I know it's just the way it works, because we had a picture on the sign. And so he really took that on. In fact, I had other candidates who said, who did your signs? Well, yeah, he's too expensive for you. But he took it on like a champ and was very supportive. So was my family. I can't complain.
I want to go back to your family just a little bit, in that, are there people in your family, I know you've done some ancestry work, but are there people in your family that you would like to know more about?
Yeah, I've learned a lot about the people who settled in this little tiny town. And I've learned a lot about them, but I would love to learn more about their families before them. I have the names, but I don't have the personalities. I have really good concrete personality information from obituaries. The obituaries in little towns are really wonderful, because they're lengthy, and they really give you a flavor of who that person was. And the couple that homesteaded in Racine, Ohio, were Lucius and Tirza Cross was their name. She was a Stanley, and her great uncles founded Hartford, Connecticut. They were some of the founding families here. So I was very lucky that I know the names and I know how far back. But I know a lot about her, because of her obituary, and I would love to have known her. She was really quite the woman. She had strong political stances and things, and she prided herself on keeping up with the times and what was happening. And she was an abolitionist, and they helped runaway slaves. They were on the north side of the Mason-Dixon line, so they helped runaway slaves, and they were part of the Underground Railroad. But she said in the obituary, it said that her greatest desire, though, was to just be a good steward for Christ. and that she did her best to fulfill that and to be an obedient Christian. And I thought, wow, what an obituary. I would have loved to have met this woman. You know, she had like 9 kids. I think it was 9 kids, and she was running a store out of their home, and her husband was gone a lot, and you know, they had crops and they had sheep and they had cattle, and they, you know, it was just amazing. And she lived to be 85 years old, you know. And so I would have liked to have known her. I know a lot about her, but I would have liked to have known about her family as well as Lucius's family. And eventually, I'm hoping we can run across the obituaries to know more.
What, or how would you like your loved ones to remember you?
Gosh, if I could be remembered anything like Tirza, I would just be thrilled. I think, you know, I have grandchildren, so I think a lot about that. How would they remember? I remember my grandmother and how much I loved her, and how much she was, and my grandfather used to always tell me how much I was like her, you know, and I have very fond memories of her. And so I'd want my grandchildren, those who know me, to think of me as always being willing to help and to love them, you know, just to love them for them, you know. And I know they all do. They're all stinkers, all 5 of my grandchildren. They're good kids, but they can all be stinkers, and I tell them that too. They tell me I'm a tough Nana. But in terms of, you know, several generations down, I would hope that when they read my obituary or they learn about me, I would hope that they would see that I just tried to fulfill my purpose and tried to be an obedient Christian and love and do what I'm supposed to do and be of service when I can, and that I got to use the gifts that God gave me. I mean, when you get to use the gifts that God gives you, you're in the zone. It's the most fantastic thing. And I've had those opportunities in my life. And I'm hungry for them even still. I'm in a period of time now where I'm a gap filler for everybody in my family. Happy to be that. But man, when you really get to use all the talents God gave you, it's an amazing thing. So I hope that that's the way they view me.
Would you like to share what you think some of your greatest accomplishments in your career are?
Yeah,
or just life, family.
Yeah, so raising 3 kids, being able to stay married successfully to my best friend for 42 years, I think those are great accomplishments. But in terms of the things that I was able to do in my life, as a volunteer and in my career, probably I served on over 75 committees, commissions, task forces related to education through the years. But there's only one that has made a significant difference for families and for kids, and that was the school choice movement. I was on the state board for charter schools for 5 years. I got to approve the charter for the charter school my grandchildren go to now. And so there will be many people who have served in that capacity, but that to me, I'm so glad I had the opportunity to do that, to give families the opportunity to put their kids where they think is best so that families can be fully responsible for their kids' education. In terms of city council, there were a couple projects I worked on that were really important to me. As I said before, I'm a process person, so I worked on a lot of things to improve the efficiency of how we do things in the city. A lot of people don't know this, but we actually have a capital management program that mimics industry. Everything is put on a timeline, so we'll know when something needs to be replaced or when something needs to be repaired. We can plan for it in our capital plan. Cities don't typically do that kind of thing, but we mirrored industry in that way, and I was able to shepherd that through and get that approved, as well as bring back reviews for our top 4. The city council only hires and fires 4 individuals, and there are no reviews for employees in the city, so I was able to at least bring back a really good program to review our top 4 employees. And so I feel like that helped to make things more efficient and more effective. I'm a gardener. I have 1/3 of my backyard are big vegetable gardens, so I was able to help the city to start a composting program. So anybody who wants to garden, you can pick up, if you're a citizen, pick up free compost, and we use the compost on our parks. So it's a non-chemical way of improving the soil and improving the grass in our parks. And so I'm pretty proud of that. My husband says, you're proud of, garbage essentially. But it's, every little bit helps, right? In terms of our community.
What role does faith or spirituality play in your life?
It's always been a big part of it. There were some times in my family where we had some rough times, and I knew that God was with me as a kid. I felt His presence. He gave me peace when it was very difficult times, and I always felt that He protected me even in bad times. And so I would say that it was always important. But boy, as I've gotten older, I just will be honest with you, I see God's hand in everything. And so now at this point, it's really important in my life, and I'm grateful to be able to share that with my children. And fortunately, it's important to my children in their lives, and we're all able to share those things with my grandchildren.
Do you attend a church in the neighborhood?
So for many years, we attended Arizona Community Church over on Rural Road near Corona del Sol High School. And I love that church, and they're wonderful people there. But our oldest daughter started attending Sun Valley, and then our other daughter and son-in-law started attending, and our son-in-law came to me and said, I know you love ACC, but do you think you could come to Sun Valley so we could all go to church together as a family? And how am I going to turn that down? I said, absolutely. So we attend Sun Valley, which is the old Bethany over on Guadalupe and 101. They have like 7 locations or something, but it's a very, very live place and lots of really great people and a wonderful children's program.
Are there any special activities or accomplishments through your church that you want to talk about?
When I was over at ACC, I worked years ago. I worked on helping just to get people registered to vote. And I have a good friend now that works for an organization called My Faith Votes. And it's about getting the faith community just registered to vote, and so that their voice is heard at the ballot box. And so I've helped her with some things, not at Sun Valley yet because we haven't been there long enough, but I think that's so important, is that all voices be heard, and especially at the ballot box. And sometimes Christians tend to say, oh, everything is so rotten and all politicians are so terrible. And it's just the worst that it's ever been. And if you look through history, it's not the worst it's ever been. It's not really great, and you always have bad apples, but you also still have people. I still believe there's some good, and so people of faith need to be active and be not just running for positions, but also voting and supporting good candidates.
Are there community recreational activities that you participate in or your family participates in?
We've always participated, well, I haven't recently since COVID, but we've always participated in the Parks and Rec programs. We've taken pottery, with my grandchildren, I've taken pottery, I've taken tennis. I did Tai Chi at one point in time. So we've done all kinds of Park and Rec programs. The clay programs are fun for the kids. But so I've taken advantage of our Parks and Rec programs a lot. They're really great here in Tempe.
Are there any Tempe businesses or events that you frequent or enjoy or want to share about?
Yeah, so a big one for us was always the New Year's Eve party. And when my children were small, it was really a family-friendly event before midnight. So we would take our kids down there, and it was a big deal. I remember one year we saw the monkeys with my son in my son, who's 30 years old, was in a stroller sound asleep, but the girls, our older girls, thought that was kind of fun. That was a big event. That and the 4th of July fireworks have always been big events for us. Now we don't do the New Year's Eve party anymore because it doesn't exist. And I hope that the 4th of July fireworks come back, because that was always a big thing that we would attend and enjoy. And in terms of businesses, I'll tell you, the business that we frequented the most and is no longer here was Monty's restaurant. When my father-in-law passed away, when my father-in-law retired, my husband would meet him for lunch once a week at Monty's. And so when my father-in-law passed away in 2005, we all went to Monty's for lunch after his memorial. And but Monty's held a lot of special events for us. It was just a great place, and we miss it.
Have your travels outside of Tempe or outside of the state or country influenced your view of Tempe?
Yeah. Yes, it's made me appreciate it. I've had the good fortune of being able to travel to Europe and to a lot of different places in the United States. And I am always, when I was on council, I would make a point of trying to, visit their local government just to have a sense and a feel for what they did. And I always came back really glad that I live in Tempe, so it's made me appreciate where I live. Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to ask about extracurricular activities, whether it's sports or arts,
In high
that
school?
you participated
Yeah,
in.
so I was a student government geek. I was on student government, and my senior year I was student body president for Saguaro High School, and at that time we had 2,500 students. And I was very active, and I was in those days they picked 3 girls and 3 boys to go to Girls State and Boys State for the American Legion Auxiliary and the American Legion. And I got to represent our school, and then from Arizona Girls State, I got to represent Arizona and Washington, D.C. at a program called Girls Nation, where you learn about government and how it works, and you campaign. It's a crazy time. And then I was really fortunate that they asked me to come back and be a junior counselor when I was a sophomore in college. So I got to go back and do that. And then when my daughter Carrie was in high school, she got to go to Girls State, and they asked me to come and be a counselor at the Arizona Girls State. So that was kind of fun. I forgot that you don't sleep at all, but I was exhausted when it was over. But I was involved in those and in a girls' service club when I was a girl. So yeah.
Are there any particularly fond memories or stories that most people wouldn't know, particularly about serving on council or connected to your work in Tempe?
Yeah, a lot of people, it's very interesting when you're in that position because a lot of people want to paint you in a box. Oh, you're this, so you go in this box. And I think the thing that I enjoyed most was refusing to be put in a box when it happened. So when I was on council, I'm a Republican, I'm a fiscal conservative, I'm a social conservative, and a bit of a libertarian. But my son was in, the School of Architecture at ASU, and he had friends who would come over, and they were amazed that I composted and that I was head of the sustainability committee. So that was another thing that we did, that when I was there, was under my committee, we cut our energy uses. We got APS to come in, or SRP, and do energy audits, and we were able to change the way we did certain things to cut the cost of energy. And so they were always surprised because it didn't make sense to them. I was a conservative. I shouldn't have cared about dirty water or dirty air. I should have just worried about the bottom line. And I'd say to them, we're supposed to be good stewards of all that we've been given, not just tax dollars, but all the things that we've been given. And so I think being able to show people that I wasn't just a two-dimensional cartoon character of a conservative woman, middle-aged woman, at that time, I think I enjoyed that. The other thing I would say is I really had a wonderful opportunity to see real camaraderie among 5 of us out of 7, and we worked really well together. And we didn't always agree, but there was a great deal of respect, and there was really good dialogue, there was really good argument, there was really good debate. And at the end of the day, however the vote came out, we supported it. Or minimally, we didn't blow it up, which was different than many of the other councils that had come before us. So I felt very fortunate and we had one council member who said, "Oh, you're just all friends, you're just a clique." No, I didn't socialize with these people. We came together, we were adults, we debated the issues, looked at the stuff, and then if you lost, then you moved on and you supported to the extent that you could. You didn't go about trying to blow something up. So that was really I appreciated that a lot from the council colleagues that I served with.
And while city council is nonpartisan, your colleagues weren't always of the same
No.
necessarily political beliefs. And
No.
so to be able to collaborate and work
Yes.
together.
In fact, the current mayor, Corey Woods, and I shared an office for 6 years. And he's a Democrat, I'm a Republican. I was the oldest on council, he was the youngest on council. And we had an opportunity 3 times, we spoke at ASU to classes and kind of blew their minds because we talked about how we looked for common ground. And the best example we had was, we had one council member who surreptitiously got the government relations person to write a proclamation when President Obama came to ASU for the graduation. And it was this glowing, wonderful, endorsement of him. And so then our mayor had a fit about it because it said things that the mayor didn't agree with, and we hadn't talked about this as a council, and this guy was just pushing it through. And so this council member and the mayor almost came to blows over it. And I grabbed Corey and we went aside and I said, why don't we rework the wording on this? It is appropriate I didn't like President Obama's policies, but it's an appropriate thing. He's the President of the United States. We should do a proclamation welcoming him to Tempe. It's an appropriate thing to do. And so let's find a way that we can word that in which we can both agree to that, and then let's present it to those guys. So we sat down. It was the first time that Corey and I worked together, and we sat down and we did the wording on that and presented it to those guys, and that's what ended up settling it. But we did that on a lot of different issues. There were a few issues he came to me and said, hey, that's not what you're doing is not going to fly. I'm just telling you, we need to rework that. Or I would go to him and say, hey, you're going down the wrong road. You need to look at this. And there was enough respect between us that we would go, oh, well, let's talk about that, And I'm very proud of that because that is how adults in the room should act. It's how you stay friends with people that you don't agree with. It's how you stay married. It's about compromise, and it's about being adults. And so we did a lot of that kind of thing. So yeah.
Now I do follow you on social media, but for those that don't, I know that you share about your garden.
Yes.
And it's really impressive.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about what it means to you, maybe your favorite parts of gardening and what you might like the best that you harvest, and maybe your grandchildren and how they help you?
So I find gardening very relaxing, but I also will tell you, and it sounds trite, but it's true, I find my creator there every morning, and I see so many parallels with life. God has these patterns to living, and you see it in the garden. In fact, I was just talking to my daughter about it this afternoon. You see the patterns of life in the garden, displayed in the garden, the patterns of seasons, reaping and harvesting. I had a plant we were talking about. You never know when somebody's going to pick up on something you say and mature, become more mature over something that you said. I said, yeah, it reminds me of the year that we had the volunteer Japanese eggplant pop up, and I hadn't planted eggplant for 4 years, all of a sudden this plant pops up because the conditions for the seed were just right. And it produced, and we had wonderful Japanese eggplant that season because of this one volunteer plant. So I get a lot of help psychologically and spiritually from the garden. But I love growing fresh food for our family. I became very interested in gardening when I was 12. It was the first Earth Day, and they were talking about that. It was the first thing that I ever noticed as something in the news. I was 12, and I remember being really scared because they were talking about we were getting ready to go into a mini ice age, and that there were going to be millions of people that would starve because crops wouldn't grow. And my grandparents always had a kitchen garden, they called it. And so I thought, well, if I know how to garden, I can at least grow food for my family. And it became a real interest at that age. And so from then on, I always had some little garden growing. And so when we moved to this house, we put a big garden in, and it's been moved several times as our house has changed. But I love the fact that there are life lessons you can teach and demonstrate in the garden for the kids. And so out of my 5 grandchildren, I have 2 that are real farmers. They are real farmers. They want to know all about how it works. They want to know how the worms work. So, I compost for a while. For about 3 years, I kept worms in a worm bin in my house for all the organic stuff that we didn't throw any organic stuff away for a long time. And so I love the fact that I can teach them. I love the fact that when they have lunch at my house, I can say, well, go out and pick the vegetable you want for lunch. Do you want broccoli or do you want sugar snap peas in the winter? And they love picking things and seeing things grow, and if they can find a worm, that's a big deal, I love seeing the delight in their eyes of discovery, and you get all that from nature. You get all that from a garden. So we have a little swinging bench under an apple tree, and we'll sit under there, and we have some of the most important talks about their burdens as little ones, and they just confess everything. It's the cutest thing, but it's the whole atmosphere of the garden that helps to, it's conducive to that kind of heart to heart. And so I'm very fortunate that the garden provides me all of that.
Now, in a bigger scope, how do you think Tempe's diverse populations can come together to form a more cohesive community? And is there something you would change or encourage?
Yeah. So one of the reasons we liked Tempe was that it was a very eclectic place. If you are in North Tempe and 85281, that zip code, that is very different than 85284. 85282, 85283, they're all very different places. And we liked how eclectic it was. We liked the fact that the university was here because it also provided more diverse cultures. So the one thing that I would say is that in terms of the diversity, it goes back to basically what Corey and I have done as council colleagues, and that is look for the common ground. The thing is our news media today, and I know you were part of the news media for a while, for a long time, Michelle, but the news media today makes money dividing us. So you don't hear the stories where people come together as much as you hear the one-offs and the outlier cases where somebody's just being ugly and nasty. You don't hear about how people will stop to help you if you've got a flat tire, or and it doesn't matter what race, ethnicity, religion, people will stop. People are kind in this town. So I would encourage kindness. I would encourage also all of us looking for the ways in which we have the common ground, not looking for the ways in which we're different. And there's a lot of commonality, and we're missing it today.
Can you share about your families, maybe your husband, ethnicity, the cultural traditions you might celebrate and share with your family?
Sure. So my background, my family's been here since the 1600s. My husband's background is very different. My husband's Armenian. He's second generation born American Armenian, doesn't speak the language, but I cook all the foods. My mother-in-law has been very, very kind to teach me. And in the Armenian culture, a lot of them don't want their sons marrying non-Armenians. So in the Armenian culture, if you are not Armenian, you are an Odar, they call it. That's the word for stranger. So they don't want their sons particularly marrying Odars. My in-laws didn't care. They've always accepted me and loved me for me. So I've been very fortunate. We've never had a crosswords in all the years we've been married, and that was more because of them than it was because of me. I mean, they accepted me with warts and all at times, so I appreciated that. So culturally, we usually have a lot of the Armenian foods at holiday time. So I make Armenian shish kebab and tabbouleh, which is a parsley salad. I do the Greeks call it spanakopita, which is the triangles with spinach. The Armenians call that spinach boreg. I make that. My girls make that. My son makes those things. We make Armenian bread, which is the big cracker bread. we make that usually in November when it cools off, and it's a whole day, and we'll use 10 or 15 pounds of flour to do it. The whole family gets involved. The floor is covered with flour, and if there's any children in walkers in the kitchen, they get covered with flour too. And it's part of what we do. It's the leftovers of his culture. My mother-in-law sometimes comes and helps us make choreg, which is a hard dinner roll that is braided. She's 98, lives in her own home still and all there, and so she comes once or twice a year, and helps to make choreg with the grandchildren, her great-grandchildren. So we do keep those kinds of cultural things alive, and we celebrate the holidays more like my family does than his, except for the food. So, yeah.
Is there anything else related to your life, your family, your education, your work, or other experiences in Tempe that I didn't ask that you might like to share?
You've been pretty thorough, and I'm pretty chatty, so I think I've given you lots of information. I guess just to kind of sum things up, I'm really grateful. I have a grateful heart that I moved to Tempe. I'm grateful that God gave me the opportunity to run for office. I ran twice and won twice. I'm grateful when he told me very clearly that I wasn't to run a third time, because if you don't have a servant's heart when you are in those positions, you shouldn't be in office. And I was worn out, so I'm glad that was a real clear message. But I'm really grateful for the opportunities I've had to use my gifts and my talents, and grateful that I live in a community that cares about people, because they do. The community leaders really do care, and I'm glad I've had an opportunity to see that too. So, and besides, I got to meet people like you.
Well, thank you so much for your contributions to Tempe, and for talking with us today, and for sharing your stories.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
And at this point, we open it up to other people to ask questions too.
That's great.
Any other questions? We covered a lot of ground.
Okay.
Onnie, when you were serving on council, did you learn anything about the history of Tempe, or get to see things that you didn't know about before?
Oh yeah.
Early days of Tempe.
Yeah, and then I served on the Historical Society Board for a while too. I think the thing that I found most interesting is I got to meet the architect of the current City Hall before he passed away, and I got to spend about an hour with him. He was a fascinating guy, and his concept for that whole complex was really interesting. Got to hear some gossip on the campaign trail about leaders in the community, that some of the things that happened way back when wouldn't be allowed today, and that was kind of funny. And then I ended up seeing some of those leaders at functions and couldn't get out of my head what I'd heard. Campaigning is really very time consuming and hard work, but it really gives you a good sense of what's really happening in the community when you go door to door. And so I learned a lot about the history of La Victoria, the area where they took the Hispanics from when the ASU came in, and they did eminent domain and took the land and put them over in La Victoria, over on the other side of the freeway. Hearing about how the Tardeada, which we have every year, was for them to be able to bring back the old neighbors and have a daytime dance and food and all that. And it's morphed because so many of those people have passed since then. And hearing that history was fascinating. And of course, the history of the Haydens, and being able to go in the Hayden mill, that was really interesting. We went in it several times and toured it, and so the history here is very rich in terms of Arizona history. And then Michael Monte is a good friend, and my gosh, that guy is just,
He knows a lot about history.
oh my gosh, and he's such a good storyteller. So, if I ever had a question about the history, I could call him up, and he was so knowledgeable about what happened and how things changed and who was involved, and yeah, so just things like that, you know.
Were you able to see other historic buildings, like when they moved the Sandra Day O'Connor house to Papago Park?
Yes, and that was really meaningful to me when we did that. They moved, Sandra Day O'Connor's house was an adobe house that they had taken the soil from the Salt River bed and made the adobe bricks, her and her husband, well, they had them made, and then it was up in Paradise Valley. And I had been in that house as a girl because I dated the boy who lived next door to them. And so the families, the Bashes and the Myers, which was the family whose son I dated, the Bashes, the Myers, the O'Connors, and several other big families always had family Olympics once a year at Phoenix Country Day, and I would go along with them to participate, to be on their team. And we would always end up back at the O'Connors. So I was actually in that house when I was a girl in Paradise Valley. So when they moved it to Tempe, it was very meaningful to me that it was being moved. And I love the fact that we have that here, and I was grateful to Mayor Hallman for caring enough about the history and the history of the first woman ever to sit on the Supreme Court. In that position, I had an opportunity to meet a lot of famous people, a lot of political leaders, and I didn't care about having my picture taken with any of them except for her. And I have that picture on my wall in my office because she was such a groundbreaker. And her stories were so powerful. She's a neat lady.
Is that the home that the Holmans live in? And you were talking about Michael Goodwin, is that the name you were talking about, of the architect?
No, was it Goodwin? No, it was,
Kemper.
that's
Michael
right.
Kemper.
Yeah,
Kemper Goodman.
That's
Kemper
right.
Goodwin.
Michael's dad.
yeah, and that's who I met.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He built a home just down the street from us on Balboa.
He
where
did.
lives. And now that's where the Chings live.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
He was very interesting.
Yeah.
Very
That's
interesting.
a very interesting home where the Chings
All right. Oh, I did not know that.
I didn't know that either.
That's fascinating. Yeah, it was really interesting. It was by happenstance I got to meet him. I think he came to see the mayor. And anyway, I got to kind of tag along.
Yeah.
Was it?
I think my older sister graduated from high school the same year he did at Tempe High School.
All right. Yeah. Isn't that something? Yeah, my connection with Tempe High was we used to play them in football. We were the Sabercats, you guys were the Buffaloes.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, back to, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Back to Kemper Goodman and Montgomery were partners in the architectural firm that sits where the building is now, the Tempe City building.
Mm-hmm.
Were you aware of any of those relationships with Kemper and Montgomery?
No,
And Michael himself became an architect,
I did not know that.
and he had dealings with the city, but that was before your time, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah. Yeah, I was on the city council from 2006 until 2015. So yeah, it was before my time. Yeah.
Well, and while you were instrumental in a lot of work for the city, I'd love this moment to just share how you have impacted candidates and policy. I'll try not to get choked up. Policy, because you have helped so many candidates from school board, like
Yeah.
myself. I never had aspirations to run, and we knew each other because our children attended the same charter
Right.
school. And when someone asked me to run, you were literally, I think, the first person I spoke to. And we sat down in your backyard, and I took copious notes, and you gave me lots of great suggestions and on how to campaign. And I did win.
You were the highest vote getter, if
Yes.
I remember correctly.
But
You blew some people's socks off, if I remember correctly.
But I remember you also, besides that time sitting in your backyard, you said, let's go around and knock on some doors. And the first door, I think I spent 30 minutes, and you kindly took me aside and said, we're going to have to get better at this, or you're not going to get through the whole neighborhood.
Yeah.
So you were really, and I know I'm not the only one, that's why I bring it up, is there are many people that have served our community that have benefited from your advice and collaboration and support and encouragement. So you've had an impact beyond your own service that I think our community can appreciate, and I appreciate.
Oh, I've enjoyed it. It's really fun. Since I've worked on so many campaigns, I feel when I have a candidate who I can support, when I can go in and help them, at least give them some ideas about how they need to organize their campaign, again, back to the process person, and how they can go about doing things efficiently and effectively. I feel like, again, I feel blessed to be able to use that. My husband jokingly, I say to him, it's a good thing you earn a decent wage, because I haven't had to. I can do all this volunteer work. And he goes, well, I don't do any volunteer work. And I said, well, we're one flesh, so you do. And it's because you've been willing to work hard and support our family that I can do these things. So I've been very blessed to be able to do that. And I still get calls, and I'll have somebody call me and say, hey, can you talk to this person over in the West Valley? They're running and blah, blah, blah. You think you could really support them? I'll say, send me information about them, because I won't do it if I can't support them, but so yeah, I've been really blessed to be able to do that. It's fun.
Well, it's been an important contribution beyond
Thank you.
your own service. So
I
thank you for your
appreciate
service and also your
Thank you.
other contributions. Thanks so much, Onnie.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you for listening. I feel
Thank
like this
you.
has been very, it's fun to do. You don't get to talk about those things very often, but
It's fascinating for us.
oh, well, thank you. This must be fun for you guys to do.
This is a joy, yeah.
Oh,
Learn about different things that different people have done in the community who's living here. Oh yeah, very diverse, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
One last question, who are the mayors that you served with?
So I served for 6 years with Mayor Hallman, who's the one who recruited me to run. And then I served 2 years with Mark Mitchell. Yeah. So, and I served with council members. I served with Robin Arredondo, Shanna Ellis, Mark Mitchell, Joel Navarro, Barb Carter, Ben Arredondo, Colby Granville, Corey Woods, and Corey and I probably talk at least a couple times a month still. I always tell him I'd adopt him if I could. I'm old enough to be I am old enough to be his father. I'm 20 years older than him. So he's a good man. Don't always agree with him, but he's a good man. So those were some of the council members. Hud Hudson, I served with him too. Those were some of the council members I got to serve with. Yeah. So.
How did you get Laura Knaprak? I always wondered how you met.
Oh, so I didn't have any desire to. So you're asking about Laura Knaprak, Representative Laura Knaprak, who used to represent this area at the legislature. So when I was, serving on PTO at my kid's school, and I was room mom, and I got asked to serve on a district-wide, Kyrene district-wide cost savings committee, budget review and cost savings committee, and I was about 8 months pregnant with my last child, and my principal said, would you represent our school at this? And I said, sure. So I went and listened to the presentation, and at the end of it, the administrator said, are there any questions? And I said, so I raised my hand, I said, yeah, when do we get a copy of the budget? Because it's a budget review committee, right? And she said, oh, you don't need a copy of the budget. She went on and answered other questions. Any more questions? I raised my hand again. I said, well, if we're not going to review the budget, can we change the name of the committee to better reflect what we're going to do, which is cost savings? I will never forget what she did, and Laura saw it happen. The woman, the administrator, looked at me, and her eyes went from my eyes down to my very swollen belly with a baby, and back up, and said, and laughed, and then said, are there any other questions? And that ticked me off. And Laura was sitting a couple seats down from me, and we went outside, and a bunch of us gathered together in the parking lot, and she came up to me, she goes, I saw what she did to you. That's very demeaning. And Laura had a baby that was 6 months old. And so we decided we would all meet at my house and we would bring other parents. So 48 hours later, we met at my house, and we had over 50 parents in the room from every school in the district. And so Laura was part of that, and we formed a very radical group called the Kyrene Parents Association. Had little yellow buttons we wore. And I think about some of the parents groups today and how rude they are. We were not that. We were, and I would lecture them actually. I'd say, do not let your emotions to get away from you. They'll use that to discredit your message, and the message we have is important. So anyway, Laura was a part of that, and then Laura and I became friends, and we decided she decided to run for the legislature, and then I worked on her campaign. I did all these wonderful plans, and then she loved it. And she'd show other people the plans that I had come up with, and then she wouldn't follow them. But we became real close partners in crime, and so much so that Tony, her youngest, thought my son Nick was his cousin because they were together so much of the time. We'd take him down to the legislature and lobby on education legislation as small children. And she was going to swear me in when I was appointed on the school board, because any elected official can swear you in. So it was on I found out that I was being appointed on the opening day of the legislature. So I called her and I said, hey, could you swear me in? It'd be kind of fun for you to do it. And she said, well, come on down to the legislature and we'll do it after the opening session. And so I went down, and she had the Speaker of the House swear me in, Jeff Grosskost, and my state senator was there, Gary Richardson. I don't know if anybody remembers Gary. He was great. He's a great man. His wife, I just love Lucy. And he was there, and Sandra Dowling, the county superintendent, was there. They all were there. I have a picture of us all together. It was really a special thing. So we were big partners in crime, and I miss her a lot. She considers herself the godmother of Tempe, you know. But I miss her a lot. She passed away a few years ago of ovarian cancer, and it's a great loss to the community.
She lived 2 houses from us, and our children used to go to ride, and we'd take each other's kids to school every day at Marcos de Niza.
So you just lived in that cul-de-sac, huh?
Yeah.
I was there a lot.
Okay.
I probably parked in front of your driveway a few times, but I was there a lot. We spent a lot of time planning her campaigns and working on stuff.
Yeah, she was a good person.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Your story about Tony and Nick reminded me of when you would take your granddaughters with you to council. Can you tell about that?
Yeah.
How that worked out?
So my daughter had her first child, and I offered to help with daycare. And my daughter, this is my oldest daughter, who's an engineer, and so that really morphed into me being a full-time daycare provider. And so I got really adept at being able to put her to sleep anywhere. So I would put her little head with one ear up against my heart, and I'd cover the other one, and I would jiggle her. I'd give her a bottle. So I'd go to meetings, take this baby with me, and she took a lot of her.
Council meetings, right?
Yeah.
City meetings.
Yeah, I took her to everything, and I met with developers with her, and then when her sister came along, I did the same thing with her, and they were real good babies, and they were good toddlers, so I could take them and sit them with a legal pad and some crayons, and they would, you know, I didn't stretch them too far. It was never more than an hour at a time, but they were very good, and they went everywhere with me. And so when I didn't take 2 of them with me though at a time, but so I was grateful that I had the job that I could bring them with me. And I got to tell you a funny story about that. I would have the girls. My son-in-law would go to work very early in the morning, and then he would come on council days. He would come home at 3, and then I would get dressed and I would go to council meetings that usually start about 4:30. And there was a period of time where the second granddaughter, Charlotte, had a pacifier, and she thought the place to store it was here on me. And so I rushed to council meeting. We're in an executive session, which isn't a public meeting, and there was this really fiery argument, and I don't even remember what it was about. It was some development, and then there people are they're really arguing and carrying on, and we finally came to some resolution. We were done, right? And I moved a little bit, and I realized I had a pacifier down here, so I picked it up and I said, does anybody need this? And Shanna Ellis just totally cracked up. She goes, I can't believe you have a pacifier. We get into the elevator with the city clerk, who's a friend of mine now still, and city clerk and Shannon and I, so 3 of us women, and I found a second one. And I pulled the second one out. She goes, you had 2 of them. And I said, I knew I was going to need them, I guess, you know. So yeah, the things that grandmas do, you know, to keep babies happy. But, and the older one remembers some of it because she was like 6 years old when I was no longer on council. The younger one doesn't, but I have lots of pictures, and I was glad to be able to bring her, you know. Glad to be a part of their lives. They're really becoming wonderful young women, you know.
Maybe you'll influence them to go into public service someday.
Yeah, you know, my kids were interested in it. We did lots of fundraisers at our house for different candidates, and even with Jeff Flake, we did years ago did one for him. We did a fundraiser for Matt Salmon at my house years ago, and they just thought that's what people do, you know. Now they're in their 30s and they say, wow, that was really something. You had this at my house. Yeah, it really was. It was kind of fun, wasn't it? We had Barry Goldwater Jr. at our house for a fundraiser for Michael Monty. That was kind of fun. And so I don't know. You know, you never know where your influence is going to lie. So I hope so. That would be really nice. But if not, I just want them to go to fulfill their purpose that God has for them.
You could sure give them good advice if they
Yeah,
decide.
yeah. Lily said something about running for office someday. That's my oldest grandchild. And I said, I'll run your campaign. You know. So, yeah. Well, thank you for letting me come and talk talk your ear off.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Our voice.
Thank you, Onnie.
Thank you.
Yeah.